This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
So you've been making your own maple syrup for years, and now you think you can sell it on Amazon. Well, you and 10,000 other people with an affinity for boiling tree sap. Enter Chris Moe, Chief Executive Officer of Austin, Texas-based Cartograph, an e-commerce company that helps food brands sell their products on Amazon. Mr. Moe offers some ideas on Amazon marketing and more in this episode of Biz News Interviews. Chris, before we go too far down the path here, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or more exactly for our listeners at least, the giant golden ice cream cone about 4 feet tall that's lurking behind you.
Yes. This is kind of like my Zoom background mascot, the golden ice cream cone. It's I actually picked it up off the street in New York back when I lived there before I moved to Austin, Texas. It was I was just walking in Soho, and for those who've been to New York, you kind of notice there's always random stuff on the curb. And so saw this on the curb, saw a cab coming by, waved down the cab, canceled my plans, took it home. And now it's kind of become a signature.
I see. You don't have to at least walk it like a dog, I guess.
It's an easier pet. Yeah, low maintenance and gets people almost as excited as a puppy.
Now, speaking of food, and I guess that golden ice cream cone might actually qualify as such, you are running a company that has a tad to do about food and the jungles of the Amazon. Tell us about that.
That's right. Yeah, I'm the CEO and founder of Cartograph. We're an Amazon agency, and we've built a lot of our business around the food and beverage category. We got started about 6 years ago now, and we've worked with about 200 brands actively. We manage in the order of $250 million in sales annually on Amazon's platform, probably around $30 million in advertising. And we've worked with some of the bigger, like, emerging food brands of the last 5 to 10 years. So brands people might know, we do Justin's Nut Butters. We do Birch Benders, pancake business that had a big exit a few years ago. We work with Rayo's, the pasta sauce company that is in the process of a big exit to Campbell's. We worked with Lily's Chocolates before they exited to Hershey's. And then we work with a number of other kind of like what people call direct-to-consumer brands built on the internet, now sometimes in stores, in figuring out how they launch on Amazon. So brands like Magic Spoon and Kettle and Fire. And then even we've expanded to other categories like beauty. We work with Necessaire. They're like a big skincare brand, and some supplements brands as well.
Well, tell our viewers and listeners, what is it precisely that you do with all of this?
It's a very good question. Oftentimes I'll answer and people will say, wait, so what does that even mean? What we do is, one way to think about it is we're like the outsourced team to solve the Amazon problem. Because to understand what we do, you have to understand what it is, what it means to work with Amazon, which is actually an entire black box of its own. But for all of these brands, they say, okay, I want to sell in a retail store, I want to sell on my website, I want to sell on Amazon. And they come to us and they say, okay, we've heard that selling on Amazon is actually kind of hard. And we said, you're right, that's why we exist. And so we do everything from figure out what exactly should they sell on Amazon, a 1-pack, a 2-pack, how big the size, thinking about the supply chain, how do they ship it in, how do they package it, how do they build their system there. We'll do profitability and pricing work of like what should they charge on Amazon. And then we do actual execution of the pages on Amazon. So with any of these brands, if you go on Amazon and shop those pages, not only do we build them, but we maintain them on a day-to-day basis and do all the advertisements for them. And so make sure that people are finding them, that there's more and more traffic, and that sales continue to go up.
You could probably do less work trying to invent the anti-gravity automobile. Why did you get into this?
So it's a good question. So my background is I've always been a consultant. I was started my career at McKinsey Consulting, and I did that for about 5 years, the large international consulting firm. And I did a lot of work in um, marketing and sale and growth strategies, did some education work, but always for big companies. My co-founder, he had built the first Amazon team at GE in their consumer electronics department. This was about 10 years ago. And he realized he had a pretty unique skill set in learning how to navigate Amazon, and sort of fortuitously met some of our first clients who were complaining about how hard it was to work with Amazon. He said, let me have a look. Was able to make things happen really quickly for some of these emerging brands. The dynamics of the emerging consumer goods landscape really favored rapid online growth at the time. And so called me up, said, hey, you seem to know something about consulting and dealing with clients and building teams and so forth. I know something about Amazon. Let's do Cartograph. And so here we are 6 years later.
Well, what has been, as you look back on it, one of the success stories you like to talk about? And I'm going to follow that up with the opposite.
Sure. I mean, I think the success stories, generally the success stories we like to talk about is brands punching above their weight on Amazon. Brands that aren't as big, may not be nationally distributed, may not be, really is an entrepreneur, a dream, usually a differentiated product, generally something that's like better for you, healthier, or better for the environment, something like that. And then figuring out how to position them just right on the platform and get them access, turn them into a bestseller, get them access to a lot of consumers when they're really early in their life cycle. And so in some cases, these brands are selling more than Coke, Pepsi, General Mills, those types of brands, just because they happen to be, right place, right time, right execution. So like example, Magic Spoon cereal is like a healthy, better for you cereal, sells more cereal than any of the major players on Amazon. And so those are really fun stories. And with a lot of the case studies that I mentioned, those are the stories that are the most fun. And we're able to really amplify these brands that we partner with.
Well, the opposite of that, obviously, is failure. Why do some businesses fail when they try to tap the Amazon market?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons, and we're not shy about it. Our batting average is not 1,000 or 100%, and yeah, I'd say there's a few different reasons. One is it can be pretty hard to win on Amazon if you haven't figured out product market fit quite yet. Which, said in another way, and this is not just food and beverage, but beauty, supplements, pet, baby products that we work in. If you haven't figured out exactly what it is your product does and how to tell that story to the consumer, sometimes it's very hard to build momentum. So that's one. Like, you might be a little bit too early and you haven't found exactly who's your customer and what are you solving, what are you delivering to them. A number two, an interesting one, is actually supply chain. Tends to be a really big problem. Supply chain, inventory, the ability to keep things in stock, get them in on time, label them properly, actually ends up being a pretty big roadblock for a lot of brands. Stumbling block. You'd be surprised. Sounds like just the back end. You don't win by doing it, but there's actually some winning by operations in our world.
I would suspect a lot of people did not expect a supply chain problem when they started their business if it began to grow so rapidly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with consumer goods businesses, inventory management is actually a huge challenge. It drives pretty much all the capital intensity of the business because effectively, you're manufacturing a product, moving it across the world, and then selling it. And so you basically have to pre-finance all of that. And so that ends up being the rub of all of these consumer goods businesses is one, they tend to be lower margin than a lot of their like tech or tech, advanced industries, other conventional industries. And then you always have to float the cost of the product for a while until you sell the product. And so that ends up being, so it's not just a supply chain problem per se, but it's a supply chain problem paired with a real capital intensity problem, which means that you don't end up having a bunch of products sitting around because you're trying to not have to pre manufacture too much of it.
Especially if it's a perishable product, such as a food product.
Yep, if it's short dated, yeah, either perishable, which like needs to be in a fridge, difficult. Short dated, where it just expires in a year, 18 months. That means is you're guessing two things. One is, do I have enough product, and also making sure I don't make too much where it gets too close to the date and you got to throw it away. So two different. You kind of find that with every industry, there's just like a couple different problems that really define good quality execution in that industry, and that's one of the big ones in food and beverage and consumer.
In starting and growing your business, Chris, what were some of the challenges that you had to deal with?
Sure. Well, I think some of the fun things about our business and the fun things about being an entrepreneur broadly is that the challenges always change, and so you're always finding new hard things. But I always tell people that in the service businesses world, in the agency world, there's two really hard moments. The first is trusting other people to do the work, which is pretty hard. And usually that hits at somewhere around 10, maybe 20 people on your team if you have a couple co-founders. And then the even harder version of that is trusting other people to train and then tell other people how to do work on your team. And that's kind of like round two of the same problem. And that hits closer to, maybe 30 people on your team. And that really, when you get to that point, it means that you have to be some degree of a fully functioning organization. You have written down processes, you have real tools, you have standards, you have really good training programs and really good ways of work and a knowledge base and all that kind of stuff. And so that has both been some of the fun, some of the joy of building has been building a system where, I'd say the best thing about the job besides the client, helping those clients really win, is seeing members on the team grow and become better leaders and better operators than even they thought possible. And so the hard is building it, but the reward is pretty cool when people really get to transform their careers and they get good at being experts in e-commerce.
Chris, if my mental math is correct, you began pre-COVID. You had to get through COVID. Now it's post-COVID. What did the COVID problem do to your business?
Yeah, so I would say every business there's kind of like two sides to the COVID problem or the COVID challenge. One is what is internal company working dynamics, and the other is what it did to the market. So we are fortunate on the internal company working dynamics. We've always been remote. And so we had a 2-year head start on how to work together, how to communicate, how to collaborate, and so forth. And, we're an intense service business, highly collaborative, not necessarily something that lends itself to a remote environment. So we have to build a lot of stuff. Like we do with every new person that comes online. I teach a class called Cartograph 101, and it is our ways of work. how do we talk to each other? How do we reply to each other? How do we run meetings? What do our agendas look like? We use Slack a lot. Like how do we respond to people? When do we respond with a thumbs up emoji? Things like that to really make it feel like you can rely upon your team and trust your team. So that's one, is we had a pretty big advantage in the head start. And it's something we put a lot of time into, of like, as a remote company, how can you build strong culture? How can you build a culture of communication that feels personal, that feels intimate, even though you're thousands of miles away? So that was one. The market dynamics, e-commerce was definitely a beneficiary of the pandemic. Understandably so. If you're at home, all of a sudden something being mailed to your house sounds like a pretty good deal. And yeah, I mean, it feels like a really long time ago, but people were really worried about how they're going to get, or how do they get their different foods or snacks and things like that if it's not getting them in stores. And so we had a tremendous amount of exposure, spoke to a ton of brands who were just kind of thinking through e-commerce. And so that was really good and helpful in getting our name out there, getting our, just the reputation for understanding the dynamics of the industry and building it. I'll say some of the conversations that we used to have around then, we don't have as much anymore. People aren't trying to ship, fresh juice or meat as much as they were back then. Sounds crazy, but like people were like, hey, I've got these, these fresh fruit juice smoothies. If I shipped $50 of them with dry ice, could I make a business out of it? And we would do the math and we'd say, okay, like you could. It's not the world's most efficient thing, nor the best thing in the world for the environment, but yeah, so that has changed a lot, and I think e-commerce has kind of moved back to the types of products that make sense on it, which tend to be lighter, non-meltable, non-breakable, and not too big too. Like it's pretty hard to ship a really big bag of chips because it just ends up costing a lot.
It would be hard to imagine getting a bag of chips delivered by the Amazon truck. Chris, you've been very generous with your thoughts, and I think you've provided an awful lot of things for people to think about as they start and grow their own businesses. What would you like to add that we haven't talked about?
I don't know. What do you typically have in mind? What are
Oh,
some
we
things
always
such
say
as?
it's whatever you want. This is where where you've been saying to yourself, the guy hasn't asked me about this.
Well, okay. So one thing that's been really interesting in our industry that's in the last 30 days or so is the impact of Ozempic, which you probably didn't think we were going to cover on an e-commerce discussion here. But so
Well, take a jab at it then.
yeah, so obviously Ozempic has been in the news as a weight loss drug, and there's kind of been chatter about what is this going to do to the food industry, right? Like some of the news happened, and then like McDonald's stock dropped, right? Because people were like, okay, things are going to change. So one thing we do every January is we look at all of the Amazon search data. What are people typing into the search bar? What are the high ranking terms? And we've been doing this for a number of years. It really helps us track, because January is where everyone does their New Year's resolutions. It helps us track trend. What are the diets? What are the things people are doing? What are people searching? What's important? And so really interestingly, this year we ran all the data, and most of the diet trends were down, less popular. Usually it's something up, something down, right? Like, keto was like the last great diet trend. The last couple of years, there was a lot of interest in like fiber and gut health, gluten-free, that kind of. But this year, a lot of things are are soft. And our hypothesis is it actually could be the impact of Ozempic. That, if you think about who are the people who have been spending a lot of money on diet food or healthy food, they're probably the people who maybe Ozempic worked for them and maybe change their purchasing behaviors. Now, the most interesting addition, I think, is that coffee. Coffee is down. Coffee is one of the most steady Eddie, like all-American things that never goes down. Searches for coffee are down, which is really interesting. I mean, if you look at some of the literature and reporting on the drug, it says that it reduces impulse, like impulse for like stimulants or addiction, and so people report drinking less. And the thing about coffee is, one, it's like, caffeine's kind of a stimulant, and then two, it's a bit of an appetite suppressant too, which you might not need. And so that, I think, has been the most interesting thing that we're kind of kicking around. We're, what to do with it as a food and biz bev brand, or in our seat, is still a pretty complex question, but really interesting for us to be monitoring.
Chris, one last thing. You probably have a website. Tell us what that is.
Sure. You can find us at www.gocartograph.com. And if you want to follow us, the best place is actually on LinkedIn. So you can either follow Cartograph on LinkedIn, that's Cartograph, like cartography without the Y, or you can just follow me, Chris Mo, and feel free to add me on LinkedIn, or you can even email me directly if you'd like. I'm Chris at gocartograph.com.
You've been listening to the Biz News Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@biznews.com. That's BIZGNUS.com. Thanks for listening.